Have you ever wondered who's really in control? Welcome to Yap and Doodle. Today, we'll be talking about that. Are you in control of your life? Do you control your own fate? Or do outside forces determine outcomes in your life? If you've ever wondered these things, you're not the first. In 1966, a man by the name of Julian B. Roeder might have wondered these exact questions, but what he set out to find was how people came to answer those questions. Roeder was a social and personality psychologist who researched how people learn to believe they have control over the events in their lives. He proposed these perceptions developed through childhood. His locus of control experiment and the development of the internal-external scale helped us to understand why some people believe their actions determine their outcomes, while others believe luck, fate, or powerful forces do. In his study, Generalized Expectancies for Internal versus External Control of Reinforcement, Roeder tried to gain an understanding of this concept. Roeder developed a psychological measure called the internal-external, or IE scale, to determine whether people tend to have an internal or external locus of the world. The participants were asked to choose between pairs of statements and select the one they believed was more true to them. Each pair of statements included one statement that reflected an internal belief and another that reflected an external belief. One option might suggest that success comes from hard work, while the other might suggest that success mostly depends on things like chance, fortune, fate, or opportunity. Originally, the test contained 60 pairs of statements, but it was condensed. Roeder refined the scale to 23 primary questions and 6 fillers. These filler questions were included so participants wouldn't easily guess the purpose of the test and change their answers, a clever way to deter bias. Once Roeder had a solid foundation to measure locus of control, he used the scale in several studies to examine how people with internal or external orientations behaved in different situations. These include gambling behaviors, persuasion, smoking habits, achievement motivation, and social conformity. The results showed clear patterns. People with an internal locus of control were more likely to believe their actions influenced outcomes, taking responsibility for their behavior, and pursuing their goals. People with a more external locus of control were more likely to attribute events to luck, fate, or outside forces. Roeder essentially designed the experiment in order to create a framework for understanding common questions about fate and control. At the same time, psychology was still trying to understand how people define and perceive what ultimately influences the outcomes in their lives. Through his research, Roeder found that there are in fact patterns in how people perceive these influences. Some individuals believe they have direct influence over the outcomes they experience, while others believe their outcomes are largely determined by outside forces. Roeder coined these two tendencies as internal locus of control and external locus of control. People with an internal locus of control tend to believe their actions shape their outcomes, while people with an external locus of control are more likely to believe that outside forces determine what happens to them. Personally, I think the answers this study provided are both introspective and observational. They help us look inward at how we interpret events in our own lives, but they also help us look outward and understand how other people interpret their experiences. These findings are applicable and useful across many fields and real-world scenarios. Anyone who aims to have effective communication in interpersonal or relational fields and scenarios could benefit from noticing how the people they encounter perceive outcomes. For example, someone working in marketing might use this knowledge to understand what type of messaging would resonate most with their audience. The same idea could apply to a counselor, teacher, or public speaker, or anyone who might adjust how they frame ideas. Roeder's test worked by giving participants clear but opposing answers to choose from. Each question included two statements, one representing an inner belief and the other representing an external belief. Participants were asked to choose the statement they believed was more true for them personally. Roeder then compared these selections in order to build a framework that identified each participant's perception of control over their life outcomes. Roeder's study was effective in that it successfully created a measurable way to study locus of control, which had previously been a difficult concept to examine scientifically. The IE scale gave psychologists a practical tool that could be used in many different types of research. However, one weakness of the study is that it relied on self-reporting. Participants chose statements that described their beliefs. Some participants might respond based on what they think sounds better rather than what they actually believe. Something that might have been overlooked is that not everyone's locus of control is the same in every situation. So, arguably, the study might have simplified a more complex aspect of personality. The concept of rotor study reminds me a lot of growth mindset. Growth mindset is the belief that you have the ability to learn almost any skill or knowledge if you put in the effort. It's very similar to an internal locus of control because it puts power back in your own hands. Your actions and efforts directly shape your outcomes. On the flip side, we can see the opposite in spaces like recovery programs for alcohol addiction. Many people in these programs are taught the serenity prayer. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Faith-based approaches like this one encourage individuals to acknowledge their limits and place certain challenges in the hands of a higher power. In other words, it creates an external locus of control in areas where the individual may feel powerless, while still supporting personal growth in areas they can influence. With that said, it's important to point out that each locus has its use. Neither is better than worse than the other. Both perceptions have their uses. One thing is apparent: our own perception affects how we make decisions. It affects how we pursue our goals, handle challenges, and interact with others. Understanding these things can help us communicate better, make more intentional decisions, and stronger connections. One thing is apparent: our own perception affects how we make decisions. They affect how we pursue goals, handle challenges, and interact with others. Understanding these things can help us communicate better, make more intentional decisions, and stronger connections. So, what do you think of rotor studies? Who or what determines your life outcomes? Thanks for joining on Yap and Doodle.